Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Franz, music director of your Windsor Symphony Orchestra, and I am super excited today to have with me Jeff Smallman to talk about his piece, Peely, and also about the compositional process being a composer. Welcome, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. It's been a little while. It's been a couple of years since I last saw you in person, but it seems like when I did, there was a whole flurry of activity because I met you about 4 years ago on the Pat and Amelia project, which was the opera that you composed of the story of oh Lord, what's the Pat's last name? Oh, Pat Stern. Yeah,
Yeah.
the story of Pat Stern and Emilia Condari. Tell us a little bit about that opera. It was a really special event, I remember.
It was a lot of fun to work on. It was a really interesting project in that, I mean, probably like a lot of people, I I had never heard of either of these women to begin with. Um,
Mhm.
Nadine Delury, who lives in Windsor, she got in touch with me. They had an idea for work that started off as a song cycle, and then over the course of time, it kind of morphed and developed into a two-act opera. Uh, and she asked just first off if I'd even be interested in something like that. I've written fairly extensively for voice, so I thought, yep, I'd be interested in this, and to be able to say I've done a chamber opera under my belt, and that's a good deal. So
Sure.
I thought, sure, I'll be interested. Let me see this. Let me know what it is I need to be writing because I'm very picky when it comes to texts and um, emotions, themes, all of that kind of stuff. But also, I just needed to know that what I was going to be giving was a good fit for what they were looking for. So that kind of got the ball rolling. I was sent some text. They wanted to know if I could write a couple of samples so that they could, also kind of look what I was doing and seeing from their end if I was going to be a good fit for them or not. Um, Everything seemed to work out well for both sides of the equation, and it was a go. So from then, it was I can't even tell you how long it took to write the whole thing because it's kind of a blur now. Um, but it was a case of trying to flesh out two specific characters, and that's different than just trying to write songs. Right? If you're just trying to write songs, you're trying to set mood, you're trying to have some nice melody, all of that kind of stuff. But when all of a sudden you're fleshing out actual characters,
Right.
particularly characters who were live living people at one point, not just fictional people, um, that changes the equation in my mind anyway, because then all of a sudden you're trying to do psychological assessments and you're trying to understand who they were as people and taking into account all of the peripheral things that are written into the opera that now have an actual effect on the music or on the direction. So all of that had to go into the process, and that was a learning curve for me. I'd never had to take that into account before. Um, it was a lot of fun. It definitely shaped what the music was doing. I did things in that music that I had never done before, and it was really interesting. Um, from an opera
Like
perspective.
what was something new that you had done that you had never done before? I love that. I love that idea of exploring and finding new things to create and to discover about yourself. What did you discover?
Okay, how I would approach certain ideas in music and what harmonic language I would use with that
Mhm.
kind of thing. There are a couple of moments uh, when Pat Stern is singing, or the character of Pat is singing, and she's talking about. Um, I mean, she's 100 years old. She's talking about I'm going to die. I hear someone at the door, which is kind of the allusion to death is at the door, and
Sure.
I had to figure out how to do that musically that I'd never set that kind of thing before. And then
Yeah.
the other aspect, again, the difference between an opera and a song cycle is that opera can change like that. The music can change in a half a second. It isn't just all long strung arias. It's here's a mood, here's a thought. takes a left turn and goes in a new direction, but then you have to also be able to bring some of those things back later and tie them back in. And that's not what you
Yep.
do in a song cycle generally. So that was really a new way of approaching composition for me, and I actually really enjoyed it.
Well, I thought your writing in that piece was brilliant. It was originally for string quartet, and the reason that we at the Windsor Symphony got involved is that when we performed it, all of the arias that Emilia Condare sang in the opera were accompanied by the Windsor Symphony Orchestra, and then all of your original composition was the rest of the opera. And it was a really interesting combination. Having done that, I was then curious about your Gorbasu variations that we
Yeah.
did for kids, and our student population loved that. And based on those two pieces, when Point Peely came to us and said we would like to commission and have a new piece written for the 100th anniversary of the Point Peely National Park, you were the person that I thought of first to create this work. Now, the work that we're going to perform and the work that you created is called Peely. Tell us a little bit about the sort of genesis of this from your perspective. Obviously, you have this incredible national park. It's one of the smallest national parks in Canada, yet one of the most visited with over 300,000 visitors per year. It's an incredible place. It's the southernmost point of Canada. For all of my non Canadian friends who are watching, it is an incredible convection or connection of wind currents and water and wildlife. It's just a real vibrant place. How did this all start for you?
Honestly, it all started when your organization came to me and said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" And of course, I love writing for orchestra. Um, the idea of what you were looking for, I think, really fit nicely with how I approach music in the first place. Um, I'm someone that needs, again, a mood, a character, um, a scene, some kind of picture, something like that, that I then try to musically describe. Okay,
Right.
so when you guys came to me and said, "Would you be interested in writing something commemorating the centenary of the park?" I immediately was like, yes, absolutely. A, it's an orchestral commission, and B, it's exactly the kind of thing that I think I'd be interested in doing. So that was fantastic. Um, that idea actually, the germ of that idea, the beginning started a couple of years before the actual commission, because I know it was at one of the concerts that someone approached me and said, this is something we have in mind, but it's still just an idea.
Mhm.
That's all I needed to get the idea kind of rolling around. And I didn't start any actual composition yet. But as anybody who does any kind of creative work will tell you, all you need is an idea rolling around in the back of your head, and your brain is already starting to put things together. So I'm sure that was a great thing. Um, and then a couple of years went by, and then I heard that, yes, it's a go. And I'm like, fantastic. This is great. It was, I think, in January that I heard that it was a go. The contract was sent to me. And then it was like, okay, we also need the parts by the beginning of March, because we need the Boeings all done. We need all of that. And of course, now I have this moment of panic in my head, because I'm thinking, can I actually do this? Because because you also, aside from just Peely, write something about Peely. It was like Peely in the various seasons, because it's a very different place in the various seasons, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yes.
so now in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, okay, wait a minute. Now I have 4 seasons of Peely. I have 1 month to do this, and I don't have time now to go and explore Peely in each of the various seasons. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I can do this. And then I gave my head a shake, and I realized, you know what, I can. I can do this. I love the idea. I want to do this. So I said yes, and then I immediately started the research.
Mm.
So for me, research was obviously a lot of pictures, a lot of online, the websites around Peely, people that I know that live in the area, giving me some descriptions of various times of the year. I grew up close to Lake Erie as well, but closer to Port Dover, so I'm aware of the various quote unquote moods that the lake can have, and I think that all played into the music. And then once I had that kind of set, it was really just, what season do I want to start with? and then now what do I want to portray in each season? So that was a great starting point for me. And once the music got going, it just kind of fed off of itself and proceeded to just write itself, I think, more or less. So
So one of the things I think is most amazing about this landscape and also Lake Erie itself, and I used to live on the other side of Lake Erie. I lived in the Buffalo side of Lake Erie. So
mhm,
I got not only the effect of the lake, but I got the snow, the lake effect snow that was pretty extraordinary. But the lake actually freezes over for
yeah,
part of the winter, and it changes completely from this producer of all this snow that's dumped on anyone on the east side to this incredibly barren landscape. And I think really it seems like your first movement in this piece was really sort of focused on that snow and ice theme, sort of really in the dead of winter. Tell us a little bit about that.
okay. Um, and again, that's exactly right. I had to figure out what each season was going to be, and I didn't want to just call them winter, spring, summer, fall because that's boring. I wanted to do something that would be descriptive, but also again tied into Peely. So Peely in the winter, to me, that was the perfect time to be, figuratively speaking, standing on the point, looking out at the water.
Right.
Um, and as you said, the lake freezes over, and it isn't just a flat sheet of ice.
Mhm.
There are these dunes, there are these the cracked ice, there's the wind that just whips across there, and then of course the snowflakes and all the rest of it. So really that was part of the research, finding the lake in winter and what does that describe musically to me, and then trying to figure out how to say that for the orchestra.
Right.
Um, to be honest, winter is my least favorite season, but I think it, this is going to sound so self-serving, and I don't mean it this way. I really, really like what the music portrays. I think it really is a great starting point. I think it sets a mood really well, and I think you really do get the picture of snow and ice, which is what the first movement is called.
It's interesting to me. Do you find, so let's go to the compositional process for a second. Do you find that sometimes when you take things a little less personally, it's like saying like, okay, this is not my favorite, or this is not something that I feel as connected to emotionally,
Yeah.
that you actually can sometimes create something that is like a whole nother world or a whole level another level of creation. I know people ask me all the time, do you like this piece, do you like that piece? And I always say no, I don't really have an opinion about it because my job is to bring it to life. But I will admit that it's much easier to bring a piece together that madly in love with, because when I'm madly in love with it, I sort of treat it differently. It's like I baby it, I take care of it in a different way than I would if I just look at it, analyze it, and bring it to life. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Um, Probably in a way, but maybe from the opposite end of that spectrum. Because if I care less about a particular idea or whatever, the danger for me as a composer, and this is probably just me individually, but the danger is I can just throw that one away
I
and
see.
focus on something that I really, really want to focus on.
Yes.
And um, I have to be very, very careful that I don't do that because I really do think that comes across in the music. If it's a
Yeah.
throwaway idea, people are going to recognize really quickly you really didn't care too much about that
Sure.
and you didn't put too much work into that.
Sure. Sure.
Right. So I had to find a spot in the snow and ice that I actually really found amazing or found wonderful, and then started from there. Okay.
Yeah.
And from that one idea, then I was able to create. And again, this sounds bizarre, and if you're a creative person, you'll get it. When you're writing or when you're composing or when you're painting or whatever, you're creating your own world, you're creating your own universe.
Sure.
It's tied to what you see around you, but it's brand new. Okay.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's what I felt like I was doing. And I had to create this. I felt almost like it was a fairy tale winter,
Hmm.
at that point with the various moods that go along with it and everything else. With the snowflakes and with the ice crystals and all the rest of it. I worked really hard at trying to create something that would entice and draw people in rather than go, ooh, it's cold and I don't like that.
Sure, exactly. Now, when you get onto spring, you all of a sudden start to include bird calls. Were these actual bird calls? Were these connected with actual birds? I mean, not by name, but by species.
Um,
This is Fred's introductory bird call.
Somebody might call him Fred. I don't know.
That's true.
Um, that
Probably
was
his
part of the.
wife, Alice.
That's right. That's right. Um, that was part of the research that I did. Actually, I went to. I can't even tell you what website it was, but I went, found what birds came across in the bird migration, or what birds you would typically see in the spring in Peely, and then I went and listened to their bird calls. Okay,
Mhm,
listen to the actual calls that they would make, and then I tried to figure out which ones of those are something that you can take and put into a musical instrument,
mhm.
because there are bird calls that, you know, they are not musical and they don't translate well into a piece
Sure.
of music. But these ones, pretty much every single bird call you would hear there is based on an actual bird that you would find in Peely in the springtime.
I mean, this is probably why there aren't a lot of pieces subtitled "The Duck," right? There's
Well,
not a
that's
lot
true. Yeah.
of not a lot of quacking music going on.
No.
Um, so the summer is heat and fog, which anybody who's lived through a summer in South Ontario is quite familiar with stickiness and humidity.
Yep.
You definitely get that feeling in this movement for sure. But the final movement, which I think is so extraordinary, is well, two things are extraordinary about it. One, the inspiration, which are the monarch butterflies, which are beyond beautiful as they take over Point Pelee National Park every fall. But also the way you capture the sort of soundscape of what the sounds of butterflies might be if they were to make sounds, I thought was really kind of cool. Is that far off from your creative intention, or was there something else that you were thinking in terms of how you created that movement?
No, it was pretty much bang on with that. It was, again, the research end. Once I figured out what the four movements were going to be called or centered around, then I had to really spend time, to figure out what I'm looking at or what I'm hearing or all the rest of it. So when it came to the butterflies, I mean, that's Peely has an amazing butterfly migration,
Hmm.
which, I've never seen that, and I think it would be amazing. So part of it is an imaginary thing in my head because,
Sure.
I'm assuming, right? I've never seen it.
Right.
But I literally watched butterflies, videos of butterflies, and then slow motion videos of butterflies. And, because I mean, a butterfly, we've all seen butterflies, and, they are amazing. But after a while, you've seen a butterfly, and no matter what their color or size, they're still butterflies, right?
Good.
So I've had to find a way to find something more than just there's this small little insect there. Okay.
Hmm.
And when I've started watching the slow motion videos, and I realized there's a lot more to the motion of a butterfly than I was aware of.
Hmm.
And it really was an amazing thing. And to be honest, that's why I love so many of these commissions, is the research end and the learning end that I get to do. It's fantastic. Um, when I first started trying to write butterflies, I couldn't do it because I looked at all the other examples of music that have been called butterflies or papillon or whatever, and all of them were flashy, really something that I didn't hear for butterflies or didn't want to write.
Right.
So, again, go back to these videos, go to the slow motion, and I realized butterflies are incredibly delicate.
Hmm.
Butterflies pretty much just float on these waves of air. Butterflies are incredibly beautiful. Um, Butterflies can be, you can't tell what they're going to do from 1 second to the next. They can be here and then flit across over here and then they're gone. And all of that then was how I tried to create that movement, was like, let's create this lighter than air, something that floats, something that's delicate and beautiful, but still gives you the sense of,
Sure.
you know, here's this thing. So
Well, I think you did it pretty brilliantly. I do have a question about this piece. So when Brahms wrote his first symphony, it took him 19 years to get over the shadow of Beethoven behind him to write the symphony. Did you feel any shadow whatsoever from the sort of potentially slightly more famous Vivaldi Four Seasons when writing a piece of Four Seasons? I mean, it seems like if you're going to take on that challenge, that at least would come into your mind at some point.
when you asked, that was the first thing that came to my head. but then the next thing was I'm not particularly fond of Vivaldi's seasons anyway, so I
Yes.
didn't feel that much pressure. I was okay with it.
So you moved it right past. That's
I was
awesome.
like, yeah, okay. And honestly, Vivaldi was how many hundreds of years ago in that
Yeah.
style, and I'm not writing that style.
Right.
So it didn't frighten me nearly as much as it might have. You know, if you
Yeah.
had asked me 150 years ago and Vivaldi was right there, it probably would have been a non-starter. But because it's, we're where we are now, it's like I can do this. It's all
Describe for me the Smallman sound. What is the sort
right.
of the sound world that you live in? How would you
I
describe your
I do not know.
ah?
I really don't. Um, I'm almost always hearing something. Okay. As a
Mhm.
composer, I think that's a pretty normal thing where there's always music playing in your head, whether it's yours or somebody else's. Um, I struggle with this question or trying to describe what I do because you can point to so many other people and you can say that's their style. Um, Whether it's classical composers or some contemporary composers, you can tell them.
Mhm.
And I actually had somebody a couple of years ago call me a compositional chameleon,
Mm.
and I thought about that for a minute, and I realized, you know what, they're probably right
Mhm.
because I don't try to write any one style. I write whatever needs to be written, and whatever
Sure.
whatever that sounds like. I can tell you the kind of what am I trying to say? I can tell you what the pillars maybe of my compositional
Tell
style
me.
are. I
Yes.
need I need harmony. I need descriptive harmony that fits together. I love melody, and I
Mm.
know that maybe you know time that was kind of looked down on in some circles. I was never one of those people. I always need some sense of melody there. I love to write music that has an emotional impact to it. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and emotion, I mean, you talked about the Gorbachev variations earlier. That's a great example of, 11 minutes of about five or six different kinds of emotion in there. It's just how do you approach these different things, right? Um, I am always surprised when people describe to me the emotional impact they had after listening to something of mine because I mean, you're too close to what you do to know it has that effect, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody tells you, it's always a surprise, but it's
Yeah.
also pretty fulfilling to know that you've accomplished that. But as
Well,
far as what is my soundscape, what is my world, I really can't tell you.
it's interesting. I mean, I only know 3 of your pieces intimately. I mean, others I've heard, but
Yeah.
the 3 pieces. But what I would say, from my observation is that, and the thing that attracts me to presenting your music is that it's clear that you have a viewpoint and that you're interested in expressing it to other people. And that sort of connectivity from you to the world is not only interesting, but it gives listeners something to grab onto and to connect with as they listen to your music, which is why I'm so grateful that you wrote this piece for us, because I think it's a terrific example of this sort of sound world that can be created, and you can like sort of be lost in it and go to another place completely. One last question for you, Jeff, before we leave. Um, Tell me your first ever musical sort of scribblings down or notes that you played, or your first musical memories. Like how did it all start for you?
Okay. Um, Before I ever started taking piano lessons, I remember, and I started when I was 8 years old. Before then, I remember every time we would go to my grandparents' place, they had a piano in another room, and I would just leave everybody and go to the piano, and I would sit there, and with these two fingers, I would play thirds
Hmm.
because I realized thirds sounded good together, and I would try to play different thirds in different order, see what would happen. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, that's all I knew that I was doing. I didn't know they were thirds. I just knew they were new notes that sounded right, and I did that. Obviously, my parents were listening, and at some point they said, "Okay, we're going to let him have some piano lessons." Um, In my first year, and I can say this now and it's okay to say this, but in my first year, I did not learn to read a note of music. I had my teacher play every single piece and I remembered it, and then I just played back to him what he played.
Interesting.
So towards the end of the year, he realized this was going on and he stopped, playing these things for me. So I had to learn. Um, he had me, you start with scale, C major scale, and I went home and I remember coming back to him with something that was not a scale, but was a piece of music based around a scale. And he looked
Yep.
at me like, well, that's nice, but it's not a scale, And that was the first time I realized I'm doing something, I'm creating something
Yep.
that nobody's heard before. This is kind of fun.
Yep.
I started, I think when I was 8, I started trying to actually write some stuff down and got extremely offended when my teacher corrected it because all I did was put whole notes for everything because I didn't know about rhythms and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So, all she did was put the exact same notes just with the right rhythms. And I had a little fit because that's, you're changing my music and how dare you?
Yeah.
And, I learned it. It was all. So
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad that you're willing to share Peely with us and our audiences once again. So thank you.
thank you very much for doing it.